So is this a brilliant move? And this is something that was flagged by the machine Stockfish, which is the chess.com engine that evaluates and has a look at moves that we play within a chessboard, which is me against my opponent. So here's a move. And the question is this a brilliant move according to chess.com? Now, I find this very interesting. And as you can see, we've got the two exclamation marks here, which according to Stockfish, the chess.com engine, this is a brilliant move. Now, what would you do in this position? Now, as you can see, this is me playing against Beto Quake 87, and I'm playing with the black pieces, they're playing with the white pieces. And now I'm in this position. But before I move on, let's just quickly go back and see how we got here. And just to go back, just to move before. So this was my position and this was my opponent's position, okay? So they're playing with the white pieces, I'm playing with the black pieces. So from here, this is what I do. I advanced my knight and I took on h4, which is just essentially taking their knight. So in this position, according to Stockfish, the engine that runs chess.com, I have played a brilliant move, but it puts me in a fork with the queen targeting my rook and also targeting my knight on these two squares. But according to the computer, this is a brilliant move. Now, at first, I did not figure out where the brilliance came from, but in review of the game, it did happen to be a good move, especially when you consider what my opponent did after. But have a look at this, and how the computer figures it out is obviously fairly simple. It is able to look at a lot of variations and look at the positions and see how one outcome could influence another, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. You know how all these things work. But which piece would you choose at this point? Do you go for the rook or do you go for the knight? Now, knowing my opponent, not me, but rather the machine, knowing my opponent, he would go for the rook. And that is exactly what they did. They went for the rook. Now, at this point, I had the opportunity to go for this bishop, but I am told to go for, sorry, to go for the knight, but I'm told to go for the knight using my bishop. Is that a good move? Now, I just want to go through the entirety of the game first, and then we'll come back to this position, just so you can see how we got here and things that we could have done better to improve this position, which is the position of the knight in the square h4, and then see how I could have developed my game in a better way so that I win this game. So I lost this game, spoiler alert, but that is not the point. The point is how I could have converted this position to actually win the whole match. But let's quickly just go back a bit, just so you can obviously see how we got to this point. First of all, my opponent played the typical e4 book move, opening, moving to the popular square, and this is very versatile. It controls the center. So I move the adjacent pawn, which is e5, again, another book move. So we have d4, c6, d5, and ce7, and f4, which is, according to the machine, not that really not an accurate move. Then I try to put some more reinforcement into the center. And I'm just going to highlight a few couple of things which I could have done better. And this is in addition to that brilliant book move that Stockfish had identified. But at the opening of the game, there are things I could have done way better that I did not, which could have even possibly lead me to winning the game way earlier. But these are the things that in chess.com are really interesting to review and have a look, because chess is just an interesting game and there's just so much possibilities on the board that one can, you know, try, one can do, one can adapt, learn, and just become brilliant, in this game. But let's continue to have a look at the openings. And there are a couple of things already that I did not like that my opponent did. And this is just advancing all their pawns forward. So they advance this pawn and I try to reinforce and they just move to f5. They just push their pawn forward. Then I obviously now at this point, I try to also create this sort of pawn structure. Now, here's the first blunder of the game, before we move into the middle of the game where I showed that knight take knight, which according to Stockfish was a brilliant move. But let's just quickly, I mean, bear with me, we'll get to that. And I just want you to see how we got to that point where I could have converted a position to a winning a game, but did not. So now I've got my pawn structures in this way. This is bad. And this was a blunder on my part. Why so? Well, it's fairly simple. I mean, if you have a look at this, I have essentially moved a piece that was protecting my king. I move forward, and already this is questionable. Okay. Just like many other life choices, which, are questionable. This is really questionable. Why would you move a pawn and leave your king exposed? And it exposes me to this diagonal from the queen and putting me on check. And what do you know? They did not figure out that move. And this was a lucky escape for me. But funny enough, like an idiot, at this point, I still do not see that my king is in a lot of trouble. And this is something I could have prevented because, as you will see, I, in a way, paid for this. But let's have a look. So now they start moving their pawns forward or another pawn forward to c4. And as you can see, I mean, they just have these marching bands of pawns moving forward. And this is not really a good strategy, especially at the beginning of the game. I mean, essentially, you've got this line right over here, which is exposing your king, your queen, and other powerful pieces which are adjacent to the king and queen. And to me, this is not how I play chess. And this individual is going to have a hard time having these kind of openings. Maybe not particularly in this game, but I do not think that this is a grand master worthy type of opening. I do not even know what you call this. In my own head, I call it the marching band of pawns because that is exactly what is happening. Even worse, when I continue to develop my powerful pieces, they continue to move pawns. Now you've got these ants of marching pawns. I mean, you're just sending these little, foot soldiers to get killed. But this can also be very tricky because now, I mean, I need to dismantle this somehow because I can't just have pawns marching all the way. And as you can see, I already have these two pass pawns, which are now within the bottom side of my board, and this is a problem. I need to try and salvage this somehow. But anyway, they did not cause a lot of harm, so to speak, but I could have done a bit better in some instances of this game. So, and this again is a huge blunder. Now, what I should have done at this point, I mean, in addition to actually moving this pawn right over here, which was a silly move to begin with, now I have completely gone and exposed my king. And what happens? They take, instead of taking with the queen, they take with a pawn and move to g6. And so I recapture as well. And then they move their queen into position. Now, obviously, this would have been more effective if they had done that early on. But at this point, I had already captured this piece and they pin my knight to my king. At least I've got my king protected. It doesn't put me in a bad position, but have a look as to what could have happened if I, or rather if my opponent had seen what I had seen earlier. Look at this position right over here, me exposing my king. Easily, they could have moved here. Actually, before that, so instead of moving this piece right over here, they could have essentially moved this piece. This puts me in check. And the only way to stop that is to move this pawn forward. But even better, look at this. So they move this piece forward and I do this. Now, if they were to move their queen here, that means the only way to salvage this is to sack my knight. And there is no other way for me to protect my king other than to sack my knight. And at this point, they take. And what do? I have to now move my king out of the way. Otherwise, it puts me in so much trouble. So obviously, I would need to start moving my king. And this then does away with the opportunity of me even having to castle. But At this point, they could easily have just taken this piece. And now I need to defend somehow, and so on and so forth. So the point is, I would have lost the knight, and I would have needed to have done way better than what I did here. This was an absolute blunder, but my opponent did not see that. Instead, they took with the pawn, and so I retaliated. Then they pinned my knight, and the game then just had to proceed from there. So let's do exactly that. So now I put some reinforcement into the knight here because I still haven't moved my king. Then they bring in their knight into the game. I try to reinforce this side of the board, or rather this square here, and they advance forward. Again, we've got these marching bands of pawns just moving forward and trying to obliterate me towards the center. But anyway, let's continue. So this, for me, was really the breakthrough which I was looking for within the game, essentially putting their king in check. Now, you would recall that at the beginning, or just a moment ago, I mentioned that just moving all your pawns forward and not having any defensive line is not really a good idea. And you really are not going to get any sort of consistent victories by having all your pawns in the middle of the board and not having anything at the back, or rather in front of your powerful pieces. You need some protection, especially for the king. And now that you've also got the queen out of the way, this really exposes your king, to bad fate. So let's continue with the game, right? So they moved their bishop into my way, and they stopped the check by interposing a piece between my queen and their king. I moved back, they advanced their knight, I castle, and I think at this point it was very good that I castle because already my king was under threat. So castle, just making sure that I get that out of the way. They advance their knight. I come here, rook to b1, and knight to f4, take, and they advance their piece forward, which is essentially the pawn, move my queen out of the way. Then they move back. I advance, trying to kick the queen out of the way even further. And at this point, this is where you will see what I was referring to. We're going to get that in just a moment. Was this a good move or was it not? According to Stockfish, it is. And I should have converted this position at some point. Now, obviously, moving my knight into this position, according to the computer, is not a good move. I should have captured this knight on the A file, but I did not see that. And the thing is, when they retreat their queen, or just move a square back, let's just quickly do that. So they moved here. And my thinking at this point is they're aiming for this pawn right over here. So what's my initial reaction without really surveying the whole board? I move here, attacking the queen and protecting my pawn. Now, at first, this was a bad move because I had the opportunity to capture this knight right over here. So the game continues. They capture my pawn and I capture their pawn. They capture with the rook, and apparently this is a blunder for whatever reason. And I attack their rook while attacking their knight as well. We haven't gotten to the good part. We're getting there. Just bear with me up until this point. We're only a few minutes into the video. So we're getting to the good part. They move their knight into action. And this is where the video started off. This is where we kicked things off. What do? I take their bishop. Now I get forked. My rook is forked. My knight is forked. What do? What did my opponent do, at least in his case? Well, obviously he took the rook because it's a much more valuable piece than it is compared to the knight. Now, at this point, I'm like, oh, a free knight. And for whatever reason, I did not see it. And at this point, the knight has been camping here. It galloped all the way from the top all the way down. It's been camping here, and I should have taken this knight way earlier. Because, the thing about chess is whenever you are up a few pieces, your morale really goes up. And especially when you get something like these or things like these, like free pieces, you just want to, you obviously capitalize on that, your morale goes up and you're in a good space. But I, for whatever reason, did not see this knight because as I showed you right over here, when they're king, or rather when they're queen, this is here. Well, actually, it's this move. All I saw is this. And so I protected that while aiming for the queen, and they moved in. I then moved also my pawn to capture theirs. They capture. I move my queen, and they move their knight, and I capture. And then this is the brilliant move. And then I start seeing, ooh, there is a piece here. But this is after they had captured my rook. So here we are. This was a brilliant move. How so? I'm being told that I need to capture using my bishop, but instead I use my queen. And this now puts me in a position where I can even fork the rook and also the king. So, what happened? Anticipating that this is the piece which I'm also eyeing, my opponent goes back and protects their pawn. Watch this. Queen to a5 plus check. My opponent blocks with the rook d2. And it is at this point where this now becomes a brilliant move. This knight on h4 becomes a brilliant position. How so? What I should have done, and this is what the computer also wanted me to do. Well, first of all, this is what I did. I moved my bishop into a much more active square, but it did not help me that much. What I should have done is advance this pawn forward. If you take, I fork you. And now I've got the king inside, and you cannot move this piece. What can the king do? Advance forward. And what's my next brilliant move? Take anyway. They take. But now look, I am a piece up. I move here. And now I am attacking the queen. And I'm also attacking or threatening or threatening even checkmate, if I can just convert this position. But it is at this point, where I need to now start to convert this or need to convert this position. I could even, well, let's quickly go back. So obviously, if they take the rook, I take the queen, and that's fine. So what move would be the best move to play? If they take, I take, but obviously my opponent is not going to do that. And even if they do, take this piece, that's fine. So what do? I can put them in check. What do they need to do? Well, that would be totally up to them. But all I'm saying is this was a brilliant play by the computer. And obviously, it's not something which I saw at that time. And there are other ways in which this position could have, converted. I mean, even if I come here, they take, I still take this. And if they take, I quit. But I do not think that this is something they would have allowed me to do. And I'm winning at this point. So that was a brilliant move, according to the machine. But of course, I did not see that. But anyway, just to resume with the game, there were a couple of blunders which then happened after this. I moved my piece here, so queen h7, and great, according to the computer, and they take, check, block. I move my bishop into position, they block, and check me at the same time. Now I've got a hanging bishop, so from here on, it's just blunder after blunder. the blunder of the blunder, and I'm just losing pieces. Everything is just falling off the board. Before you know it, queens are going to disappear, and before you know it, I'm in a precarious position, and there is nothing I can do at this point moving forward. I'm really in a rut, and they have a bishop, a few pawns as well from my side, and there's not much at this point, which I could have salvaged. I took their queen, they took mine in exchange, they took my rook, and I did not see this. The whole idea with moving my rook to the c4 square was just so I can come all the way here and then pin their king to their rook, exchanging that piece and possibly having a chance of survival. But that is not what happened. And so, as you can imagine, they were about to queen. So, yeah, and the game continued and I lost on time. So yeah, so that was the game that I played, and it could have been better. There were some blunders. There were things which I could have done well, from this point, maybe just a few moves back. Uh, I think, yeah, towards the beginning, this was one blunder, and then this was brilliant according to but yeah, there were a couple of blunders. I mean, you've seen the whole game. But anyway, well, that is it for this game. Looking forward to bringing you more games in the future and things I could have done better, things I could have improved. But I really want to start now focusing more on understanding openings from your Italian, to your King's Indian, to the Karakan and the Sicilian defense and all these other nice complicated terms, that just have many variations when it comes to chess. And I think that will really help me to improve my game. I do have a good game plan, but every now and then I typically make about 2 to 3 stupid and silly moves, and those typically cost me. So if I can correct that, then I should be in a position to play better chess and really start to win most of my games. Still on my road to 1000 elo, and from that 1.5, and then 2000 and so forth. I have no idea how long it's going to take me, but of course I'll just stick to it and do my level best. So that is it for this video. If you like what you see and you want to be part of the community, well, you know what to do. If you like the video, you know what to do there as well. If you have any comments, that is why we've got the comment section below, so you can share your thoughts as to what you think about my games, maybe even possible things that I could improve. And for the rest of you, as always, I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, take awesome care.